Hello there, my name is Ian, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to take a look at the latest release from Zappa and Universal Records, One Size Fits All, the 50th Anniversary Edition. The latest in a line of album-centric anniversary releases, One Size Fits All 50th Anniversary Edition compiles the original 1975 album plus session outtakes and rarities, an unreleased fall 1974 concert from Rotterdam, Netherlands, plus multi-channel mixes and bonus vault video goodies. Originally released on June 25, 1975, One Size Fits All was the culmination of the classic Mothers of Invention sextet lineup, consisting of Frank on guitar vocals, Napoleon Murphy Brock on woodwinds, George Duke on keys, Tom Fowler on bass, Ruth Underwood on percussion, and Chester Thompson on drums. The lineup, of course, had its roots in the Apostrophe and Roxy and Elsewhere albums, but after undergoing several permutations and shifts, had slowly pared down by the fall of 1974. The centerpiece of this album consists of two road-tested and fan-favorite numbers, INCA ROADS and Florentine Pogan, both captured at the September KCET Los Angeles TV performance, featured in A Token of His Extreme, and later in the Dubroom Special videos. The brilliant and iconic INCA ROADS solo would of course be flown in from the Helsinki, Finland performance from later that month. And of course, if you have You Can't Do That on Stage Anymore Volume 2, you're very familiar with this performance. In December of 1974, the band would convene at Caribou Ranch Studios in Nederland, Colorado, a studio owned by Jim Guercio and frequented by the likes of Chicago, Blood, Sweat and Tears, and of course Elton John. There, they would work on basic tracks for more of the songs on the album. Of course, Tom Fowler had broken his hand not long before that and had been replaced on the road by James Birdlegs Human. There's a great story of Birdlegs filling in for him, and Tom is yelling the chords to these impossibly difficult Zappa charts from off the side of the stage. Human ended up joining for the sessions, which mostly consisted of George on piano, Chester on drums, as well as Ruth Underwood on percussion. Located in the Rocky Mountains, the band found themselves living in a situation not unlike The Shining, isolated in the snowy mountains some 8,000 feet above sea level, where they had to regularly trudge across the tundra to their secluded cabins. It was here, in this unique situation, that the cracks in this famed lineup finally began to show. Aside from the human toll the situation took, such as frequent nosebleeds and the need for oxygen, the higher elevation was also problematic from a technical standpoint. Instrument tonality could be a challenge, and so was monitoring. Regardless, the band managed to complete basic tracks not only for the remainder of the One Size Fits All album, but they would also work on songs later released on albums such as Bongo Fury, Sleep Dirt, and Studio Tan. Following these sessions and a New Year's Eve performance, Chester and Ruth split from the group. Frank would add childhood friends Danny Wally and Don Van Vliet, aka Captain Beefheart, to the touring lineup, along with Terry Bozzio on drums, a newcomer. Tom Fowler eventually rejoined, and sessions resumed in January of 1975 at the record plant in Los Angeles to complete the album for a June release. Oddly, the album One Size Fits All didn't fare as well in terms of sales as Frank's previous studio works, Overnight Sensation and Apostrophe, or in fact the live album Roxy and Elsewhere, but has since become a well-deserved classic. And speaking for myself, I've always adored this album. In fact, it may be my favorite Frank album of the 70s, at least the mid-70s. I remember hearing INCA ROADS for the first time, and I believe it was actually on the Best Band You've Never Heard in Your Life album from the 1988 tour. But I remember hearing that for the first time and feeling like it just came from absolutely nowhere. And then going back and hearing this material for the first time on the studio album impressed me even more. It's no secret that INCA ROADS is maybe my favorite Frank Zappa composition. It just runs the gamut of everything that I love about his music and features two brilliant and very lyrical solos. Both the Frank Zappa guitar solo, which I mentioned before is flown in from Helsinki, Finland, but also George Duke's keyboard solo, which when you watch the KCET footage, you actually see George laying that down in real time, which is astonishing. That song in particular combines the humor of Frank Zappa's music. It offers complexity. It almost leans toward prog rock parody, but at the same time kind of owning the genre and presenting it in a way that was totally unique to Frank. The remainder of the album, I find, is actually quite blues-based, and we have the song Can't Afford No Shoes, which is something of a anti-Nixon anthem, something I didn't know until relatively recently, but it tracks. And the very lyrically beautiful and I would say even romantic Sofa. And we, of course, get two versions of that, one instrumental and one with lyrics. I used to not care for the lyric/vocal version of Sofa, but having the chance to hear it, especially in the Atmos mix that's included, I find it actually adds quite a bit to the song in terms of vocal harmonies. And I'm also very partial to when Frank speeds up vocals and gets that munchkin sound. I think it's one of his thumbprints. It's all over Montana. It's all over the Uncle Meat album, We're Only In It For The Money, and it's all over this album as well. Pajama People isn't my favorite song on the album, but again, it continues this sort of bluesy trend. I feel like the complexity of this album really lies in the INCA ROADS track, Florentine Pogan, and to some degree Andy. But the rest of this album feels like Frank is wanting to break away maybe from some of the more complex charts that you hear on like the Roxy and Elsewhere album. And he's heading toward, in my opinion, working with Captain Beefheart and Denny Wally on the next project, which would be Bongo Fury. Pajama People, again, it's not one of my favorite tracks. Apparently, it's kind of a dig at his bands for being boring and just wanting to play chess, which I have mixed feelings about. But it does feature an outstanding guitar solo, which is, in my opinion, a composition in and of itself, and it kind of saves that song for me. Of course, I mentioned Florentine Pogan, which is terrific, and we're going to talk about the Atmos mix in a little while, but this is actually the song that probably impresses me the most in the multi-channel mix because it's so densely textured and interesting. The only drawback is that I do wish he would have included the jam, which I suppose was omitted for time considerations because the jam goes on another 5 minutes, but it always feels like that song is only half complete when I listen to the version that's on the One Size Fits All album. A song like Evelyn, a Modified Dog is sort of Frank in that Muffin Man mode, and I'm talking about the early part of Muffin Man, which I think was actually recorded at these same sessions. But it's George Duke on some sort of tack piano or something, and it's a great example of Frank's wordplay. And there's even a reference to the panchromatic resonance and other highly ambient domains, which is, of course, a reference to the way that he recorded the voices in the piano from the Lumpy Gravy and We're Only In It For The Money, and later Civilization Phase 3 records. San Bernardino is just, again, a great blues number. I love hearing Johnny Guitar Watson, who's one of Frank's heroes. He shows up and does a little singing/monologue at the end that I think is totally singular. I love the guitar playing and the interaction of the band. And I mentioned Andy is one of my other very favorite songs on the album, and it definitely is the merger of the kind of prog rock thing and more compositionally based pieces with the blues rock thing. And I think it's maybe the most representative of the album and this period of Frank's music. And I think that there's something to the fact that it is so accessible. It's blues-based, which makes it fairly easy to listen to. But it does have some of Frank's more out there ideas. And when you build up the eyebrows, like we're going to talk about Can't Afford No Shoes in just a minute, but that's a song that started out as basically like a boogie-woogie blues number, and makes me think of Southern rock almost. But when you have Frank's eyebrows and his vocals and his guitar parts, I say his vocals, but I mean Napoleon and George's vocals too, all built up on it, it sounds singularly Frankified. So what's included in this new 50th anniversary box set? Let's break it down. The first half of Disc 1, as well as the entirety of Disc 2, are comprised of session outtakes and vault oddities. These selections reveal the history and creation of the One Size Fits All album. The tracks are presented in the album running order. Some of these, for example, give us a glimpse from the very earliest recordings of a song, including alternate lyrics and extended sections. And in many cases, they bring us right up to the penultimate mixes. This approach allows us a rare opportunity to hear Frank workshopping these compositions. We also get a peek into the Caribou Ranch sessions in the Colorado Rocky Mountains. And in some cases, we hear the origins of these songs from rehearsal and live tapes. One example being the track Bitch, 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 which is an early version of San Bernardino. What's interesting is that we hear a rehearsal version, which has a kind of unique lineup. This is Frank Zappa on guitar vocals, Jeff Simmons guitar and vocals, George Duke, of course, Tom Fowler, Chester Thompson on drums, Ruth Underwood, Robert Frog Caminera on vocals, and Tony Duran slide guitar, and in parentheses, probably. But the song eventually evolved from this rehearsal tape into San Bernardino, and you hear the lyrics get changed around, and at one point you actually hear a little bit of Sleeping in a Jar poke into this arrangement. And at 9.5 minutes, I think this is one of my favorite things from this particular, the studio sessions part of the box set. Of course, the replay value of this sort of thing is perhaps limited and probably only of interest to us hardcore nuts. But for those of us who have a fascination with Frank's process, it's an absolutely indispensable audio documentary. I mentioned before that I especially enjoyed hearing how Can't Afford No Shoes evolved from the fairly straight-ahead boogie-woogie blues of Ralph Stuffs His Shoes into the more refined final version. It almost sounds to me like an early Skynyrd or even Ted Nugent cut at first, but the final version with the eyebrows and all the vocals is totally Frankified. Also of particular interest is the Florentine Pogan Rough Mix alternate solo. Of course, Zappa heads will note that the epic KCET solo was edited out of the album, which for me, as I mentioned before, guts it just a little bit. Here, you can listen to Frank attempting a Hot Rats Sessions approach to this solo, trying out two very distinct overdubs before ultimately deciding to cut the jam from the album completely. Disc 3, as well as Disc 4, are comprised of the Sports Palace Ahoy Rotterdam, Netherlands show from September 28, 1974. At the end of Disc 4 are two rarely performed selections taken from the Gothenburg, Sweden performance from only 3 days earlier. Historically speaking, it's the first time we've gotten a complete show from the fall 1974 European leg, featuring the classic six-piece lineup. Timeline-wise, this finds us a month after the August KCET A Token of His Extreme performance. The Helsinki, Finland show, edited for release on You Can't Do That on Stage Anymore Volume 2, was a week before. Erie 1974 was 2 months later, on November 12th, and the Dayton, Ohio set from the Apostrophe Box was November 20th. This concert is very strong, and it sounds great too. It's been mixed from 4-track by the always dependable Craig Parker Adams. Joe Travers notes in the liner notes that Ruth Underwood's percussion wasn't captured well, but it does improve sonically as the show progresses. And he also describes Frank's guitar as edgy. I would agree with this take, but neither of these issues detract from the overall experience for me. In fact, I think it's one of the better sounding road tapes style performances by far, and it captures something special, particularly in the second half. The first half of this Rotterdam show, which is the entirety of Disc 3, is kind of a mixture of songs that we're used to hearing with a couple of unique choices. We open with, of course, Tush Tush Tush, Stinkfoot, INCA ROADS, which is kind of a sedate version. It's really well performed, and all the parts are there. It's not the lounge version. Of course, this is after KCET, so they had the final structure of it in place at this point. Frank's guitar solo is a bit meditative. This isn't one of his more flights of fancy type guitar solos. And of course, George Duke lays down a reliably wonderful piano solo in the second half. There is one moment where Ruth Underwood messes up on the iconic marimba part, and you hear her trying it several different times before she gets it right. And it does kind of mess with the momentum of the piece, and this is just a me thing, and I'm sure that people will disagree with me, but I kind of wish that those false starts had been edited out. And I think we could have edited right to the perfect performance, we'll say, the accomplished performance. And because it does kind of ruin the momentum of the piece to have those redo, redo, redo. I know it's real. I know that people want to have this fly on the wall approach, and I totally respect that. It's just for going back and listening to it again, I think I would have preferred a slight edit there, but it's just a me thing. We do get a really nice version of Florentine Pogan, which I'm not really used to hearing a lot of live versions of this, aside from KCET, and of course, many years later, they played it on the 1988 tour. But I haven't, again, heard a whole lot of versions of this song, at least not the version as released. I think that there is a kind of earlier version on the Apostrophe box set, but this is closer, again, to the KCET performance, which is the One Size Fits All album. Montana, there's a song that whenever it starts, I kind of feel like, oh, another version of this. But it actually ends up being a really nice version, particularly in the solo section, which is less of a Frank feature. He does get an opportunity to sort of take center stage and be the main improviser. But it kind of turns into a group improvisation, especially with George coming in underneath of him. And it's very different for a Zappa track. This concert takes a turn for the better in the second half. We have an absolutely barnstorming rendition of Redunzel, which is one of my very favorite versions of the track to date, at least that I've heard. I think Cheaper Than Cheap might be the gold standard for me, but this is another really terrific version, and it easily rivals it. But then in the second half of the concert, which takes up almost the entirety of disc 4, we get one of the more exploratory versions of Dupree's Paradise. There's a couple of songs quoted here. I Found a Love from Wilson Pickett. Frank has this opportunity to kind of play in this almost melancholic bluesy style. I keep mentioning that Frank is heading for the blues, and I feel like he was hungry for the blues in this period. And you definitely hear that come to fruition with Bongo Fury, which was actually recorded, I think, only in May of 75. So it had been recorded before One Size Fits All even was released, which is rather interesting. If you like the more exploratory, improvisational side of this era of Zappa's music, you're going to love this set. If you are more interested in the song-based stuff, which is, I think, more what Cheaper Than Cheap offers, you might be a little disappointed. Personally, I kind of lean toward the song-based side of things. Like, I like hearing like the early Mothers tracks played by this lineup and some other tracks that we don't get here. But on the other hand, I also really appreciate the opportunity for something totally unique. And that's what the second half of this concert offers. And it's very much worth your time. I also really like the version of Pygmy Twilight that's here. It's very close to Helsinki, Finland, which I think I mentioned was the same month as this. It's that same arrangement. The Helsinki, Finland version is always going to be the ultimate version of Pygmy Twilight for me. But this comes rather close, and it's got another great solo from Frank. So I can't recommend it highly enough. At the end of the disc, we have two performances from 3 days earlier. This is September 25th, 1974. And we get Ralph Stuffs His Shoes, which is, again, the early version of Can't Afford No Shoes, but this is a really nice live version with a lot of energy. And we get a rare performance of Pajama People. Again, I mentioned that's not one of my favorite Frank tunes, but it's a total rarity. Like, I think I maybe have heard one other live version of it, and it wasn't really as well formed as this is. So a nice inclusion, and I like that Joe Travers has included these for historical purposes. Disc 5 is my personal favorite inclusion in this set. As a multi-channel head, I am personally checking off a huge wishlist item by finally having this great album presented in 5.1 and Dolby Atmos. Included with these new mixes by the ever-reliable Eric Goebel and Karma Auger are two Zappa-created mixes. Sofa Number 1, offered in its vintage 1975 quadraphonic mix, which is unreleased up until this point, and San Bernardino, mixed in 6-channel from 1993. Observations about the Atmos mix. It's absolutely killer, especially at high volume. The 5.1 mix is a little bit louder, so I would recommend it if you're playing this back at lower volumes. But the Atmos is, I'd say, much more dynamic, and it's very crankable. Chester Thompson especially sticks out to me. His tom-tom rolls are positioned in the heights, so it's like thunder from the heavens, really. The opening of this album, INCA ROADS, has George's keys puttering all over the place. And it kind of tells you right away that you're listening to something in multi-channel, which is something that I look for in a good mix. You have Frank's iconic and lyrical solo coming from the heights again, so it feels like it's coming down from the ceiling. And there's some really cool moments in general with this mix. For instance, Pajama People, Frank's guitar solo is presented in double stereo. So his guitar solo is completely filling your front left and right channels as well as your back left and right channels. So you're just completely immersed. As I mentioned before, Florentine Pogan ends up being the most interesting and textured mix, especially in the multi-channel format. Great use of heights for vocals. I love hearing Frank's harmony vocals, especially spread out. And there's some hilarious Frank bass vocals in Florentine Pogan, I believe, that were really cracking me up while I was listening to this. And I also just love hearing the vocal arrangements picked apart and spread out across the room. And it really shows you how wild and innovative a lot of these choices are. They're based in kind of the doo-wop and R&B tradition, but of course, this is a very different kind of music, which makes it very interesting. Comments on San Bernardino. The 1993 version is an interesting inclusion. Not that it's the greatest sounding version of the track. It's a little bit compressed sounding and has some odd use of reverb. But I noticed in comparing it to the Atmos mix from Auger and Goebel that they actually copied a lot of Frank's positioning from the 1993 mix. And, there's stuff like Frank's rhythm guitar overdubs panning back and forth in the back speakers, which I really like to hear. The other thing that I noticed is that Captain Beefheart's harmonica, of course he's credited as Bloodshot Rollin' Red, but the harmonica part itself is given much greater emphasis in the Atmos mix of San Bernardino. So if you're a Captain Beefheart or harmonica or blues fan, I think you're really going to enjoy that. Also included on the Blu-ray disc are 2 newly transferred, restored, and edited videos from the KCET 1974 TV, A Token of His Extreme special. These are, of course, INCA ROADS and Florentine Pogan. These have been granted a new transfer and appear to have a fresh color grading. Also, the distracting edits and claymation added over Frank's solo in INCA ROADS has been mercifully removed, allowing us to witness the band interactions undisturbed. Not that I dislike or don't appreciate the amazing Bruce Bickford's work, it's just that I prefer the option of being able to see a clean version of this footage, and that makes me a happy guy. I actually like how the Cheaper Than Cheap Blu-ray includes Bickford's animations with a new transfer, and I can just watch them whenever I choose to. I really just appreciate having the option to either see a clean version of the footage or to see it as Frank, quote-unquote, intended. Some thoughts on this footage. It's very clear. For instance, you can see the pores on George's hands as he's playing the iconic Inca solo. There's a moment where Frank is communicating to Ruth, and she's got her mallets in her hands, and she's kind of praying like this. I realized that Frank is discussing with her non-verbally how fast the ending marimba line tempo is going to be taken, and she's begging for him to take it easy on her. So let's talk about the packaging. The packaging, once again, is the clamshell style of the previous sets in the series, Waka Wazoo, Overnight Sensation, and Apostrophe. It replicates the original front and back covers of the album, plus the LP gatefold image with lyrics inside. The booklet is thick and printed on sturdy paper and feels really good in your hands. It's an excellent read and reference guide for these recordings. Included are 3 essays from Vaultmeister Joe Travers, Rolling Stone magazine editor David Frick, and of course the always amazing Ruth Underwood. The discs are included in these cardboard sleeves, which is a great presentation as it avoids scratching. It all stacks neatly back into the box and packs a ton of material into a small package. I'm very happy with it overall, but the more discerning collectors might note that the box size is slightly different than the previous in the series. Does one size really fit all? Actually, I think this box design is slightly better quality than the previous ones, so I won't complain too much. The only thing lacking here is the remainder of the Caribou Ranch sessions. One Size Fits All at one point was planned to be a double album, and of course, many of these recordings ended up on later albums, such as Bongo Fury, Sleep Dirt, and Studio Tan. If one focuses on what is here and not what isn't, It's another incredible box in this series, and it continues the winning streak that the Zappa releases have had these past year or two. Hopefully, this box sells well enough to warrant the already rumored Bongo Fury Anniversary Edition. I would absolutely love some concerts and outtakes, as well as an Atmos mix of Bongo Fury. At some point, I hope we also get Studio Dirt, a box set of Hunch and Toot goodies and Gregory Peccary madness, plus multi-channel mixes of those great albums. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. On Friday, this week, I'm planning a live stream with Bill from Bill's Box of Sound, in which we will go further in depth and detail on this great one-size-fits-all boxed set. Feel free to leave me a comment. Do you plan to pick this box set up? What's your favorite disc or discs? Does the Atmos mix of INCA ROADS exceed your wildest teenage fantasies? Let me know. Until then, catch you later.